All right, welcome back. Well, let's talk about some of the findings that we have from this method that we set up for you. And I hope that this might evoke your imaginations a bit. I hope that we can talk more about this when we gather and discuss over the next couple of weeks as well. So remember, we are doing this project called DIA. We are asking the question, what are the most prevalent transitions young emerging adults encounter as they negotiate an off-lesson defined path from adolescence to emerging adulthood? And then we have this definition of transitions, which I have done for you before. And so I want to give you some of the findings from the literature review of what we discovered of the 7 transitions, and then what we learned from some of the data. I'm going to keep this a bit top shelf, but we'll get to that. We also did something else. We did a young adult ministry ecology, like where is ministry happening for young adults? I'm not going to share that now, but that will come up in a couple of weeks as we talk about that as well. So when it came to transitions, our literature review, we kind of came up with these 7. There was an identity transition, vocational transition, wellness transition, spiritual or religious transition, responsibility transition, geographical or institutional transition, and relational transition. These were the ones that seemed to be most significant in the literature review, and we wanted to see, as emerging adults talked about their transitions and responded to them in our survey, if these transitions showed up in the ways that they responded. Now, as we did this, we also recognized the fact, as we reflected on the data that we got, that perhaps there's a less technical way of talking about transitions. And so we're playing around with the next terms. And this is, again, is super fresh stuff. Like, you're going to see this now. I may change some of it before the next time I present it. That's how hot off the press this is. And so these transitions, we say, are this, is that, and again, these are the same ones. I just given them better terms, I think. We have self-identifying, contributing, self-caring, meaning-making, taking responsibility, acclimating, and relating. Okay, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to briefly try to unpack each of these so that you can understand what they mean, and perhaps you can think about this as you think about your own life and you think about those that you serve. So when it comes to the identity transition, we call this one self-identifying. Okay, emerging adults are becoming self-identifying, intersecting who they are, and they're moving from their aspirational and inherited self-labels to doing the hard work of naming, accepting, rejecting, harmonizing, and pursuing who they identify as and with. Okay, so think about that for a second. Remember, we've talked about this idea of harmonizing before. This is where an emerging adult is having, in many ways, to reframe who they see themselves to be. Maybe grieving an aspiration, maybe stepping into something new, maybe having to take up something that they didn't realize they need to before, maybe coming to grips with their background or their heritage or their race that is important to, for them to articulate who they are. And so this is what's happening here, is that they're beginning to self-identify and they're beginning to own who they are and who they see themselves to be. Now, what's interesting is, you remember before we talked about this idea that transitions have these two parts, right? Sometimes they experience a transition and sometimes they have the effort to work through it. And as we interviewed emerging adults, here are some things that they said. They said that 40% have experienced racial discrimination. Like almost half have just blatantly said, I've experienced that. And that's, probably had an effect on the way that they think about this identity transition. And then 50% are working to understand their racial and ethnic identities. So about half are also trying to work through and actually think about that. When it comes to the relational transition, or what we're calling relating, we see that emerging adults are actively seeking and negotiating their relationships of friends, family, and community, evoking trust, boundaries, celebration, and grief. And what's really interesting here is that there's just this interesting negotiation that happens. You have some emerging adults, as they leave college or maybe an earlier part of life, moving to a new place or starting something new, realizing that some of their friends are ghosting them, or they don't know how to negotiate, how to hold on to some relationships and letting go of others. They're setting boundaries with certain family members while trying to pursue others. They're trying to think about their role within their family. And so all these things are sort of at play here as they think about their relating. And so 82% said they experienced fallout with good friends. That's pretty high. And about more than half are seeking to establish new friendships or romantic relationships. So this idea of sort of relating or this relational transition seems to be something really, really significant to them. Vocationally, or we talk it contributing because it's bigger than work. It's like the thing that I want to give myself to. This is their efforts to find harmony between what they want to do and their need to provide for themselves and others, right? So the tension that we have with emerging adulthood is, people have told me I can be anything I want to be, but I can't be everything. So how do I actually live into like this heartbeat of who I'm about and what I'm to be, but how do I also provide for myself and oftentimes provide for others? And here what we found is about close to 80% have searched for a job that they care about, and about another 80% are working to clarify their purpose. So there's this clarity that they're looking for, and there's this searching that's happening for them that seems to be quite significant. When it comes to the responsibility transition or taking responsibility, we said this, that emerging adults, it's their intellectual, emotional, and relational strength is stretching or growing to bear more of the weight of their lives and relationships once held by adults on their behalf, which can be simultaneously overwhelming, satisfying, and even comforting. Okay, so this idea of taking responsibility is that like other people perhaps held pieces of my life and did things for me emotionally, relationally, financially, tactically, whatever it might be. But as I'm stepping into this space of emerging adulthood where I am taking on more responsibility for my life, I'm beginning to feel the weight of the responsibility of things that others have held for me in the past. And so this taking responsibility is actually quite dramatic for them. 80% are trying to keep up with their finances. 88% are working to become more financially independent. So again, this is a really significant transition for them as they think about this responsibility and taking responsibility for their lives. And when it came to wellness, we're saying that emerging adults are realizing that their mental and physical well-being and wellness is up to them. Okay. Again, this is similar to responsibility, but it's really, really focused here on wellness, physically and mentally. Perhaps as a younger person, they've had a lifelong illness or a medical condition that that a parent or a guardian has made sure that they were all right or got the medicine for or made sure they had the checkup or whatever it comes with that. And now that's something that they have to own themselves. Perhaps they actually realize that the ways that they ate when they're 18, they can't necessarily eat that way in their mid-20s anymore. And they're having to make changes because they're seeing physical changes, or they're becoming unhealthy with regards to what they're eating and how they're living their lives. And so there are changes that they can make to do that. And the same is true with mental health as well. Like as they are living into their emerging adulthood and beginning to take more responsibility for their lives, they're also taking responsibility in their wellness transitions of just taking care of them with their mental health, getting counseling, seeking help, addressing different perspectives in their lives, thinking about maybe medication that they need or whatever it might be, right? So this is a really interesting moment where they have to sort of take on this responsibility where perhaps they could not need to before, or maybe in some even said almost ignore it, but now that they can, it's sort of front and center with them. And then we see that 50% have experienced physical illness or injury at least one time in their 20s. 78% have experienced a mental health challenge. We certainly are aware of that. 85% are trying to make healthy choices to improve their physical wellness, and about the same amount for mental health as well. So this is a high priority for the emerging adults that we talked with. When it comes to geographical and institution, we call this transition like an acclimating transition. It's their efforts to adjust to unfamiliar living and working environments. So if I move somewhere and I'm in a new town or whatever, I have to sort of find the rhythms about how I get around, how I make friends, how the community works, what's my place in it. And the same is true with a new job as well. As I step into an environment of where I'm working, I have to think about what does it mean for me to succeed? Who do I need to know? Who do I go to? Who can I trust? What kind of self do I bring to my work environment? And so there's something unique about this acclimating transition that we find was raised in the literature, but also came through in some of the findings as well. 50% moved to a new city, about the same city, and about the same amount are building social community in a new city as well. They're looking for ways to do that. And so this requires a transition and work on their part to do that. And then when it comes to the spiritual and religious, we've been using the concept of meaning making. Sharon Dallas Parks talks about that. It's sort of a one word that sort of captures spiritual and religious rather than always saying spiritual and religious. And it's a little more generous in expanding that idea of what that looks like. And so this is their quest, emerging adults' quest, to connect their spirituality with a community. Okay. And so what you can see what we're trying to do here is maybe get away from the binary of going to church or not going to church, but actually thinking about the fact of like, what are the meaning-making beliefs that I have and how am I aligning them with other communities so that I can express them, connect them, engage them, articulate them, in a community that sort of shares those meaning-making beliefs in ways that can help me grow, right? So this idea of meaning-making or the spiritual or religious is never just sort of individualistic, right? There's this communal element that we thought was really, really important. And here we know that more than half have doubted or questioned their religious teachings of their childhood, and 70% are practicing their faith to make it more integrated in their lives. So we find that at least in this sample that we did, there's a tremendous amount of emerging adults that are trying to find ways to integrate their spirituality with their lives, which requires work and effort on their end. So what's interesting about these transitions is that they also are interrelated and interconnected, right? It's rarely that like I'm just going through one transition, right? But what can happen is that one transition can beget another transition. So let's take this for example. If I get a new job, I might experience a vocational transition, but it moves to a new city. So I have to think about the acclimating transition. And there I'm also thinking about the friendships that I'm leaving and the new ones that I'm making. So there is this idea of sort of a relating transition. And I'm also then thinking about, well, what does this mean for my faith now that I've left the community that I'm a part of? And so there's a meaning-making transition. You can see that they impact each other. And at times, there are going to be some transitions that are more salient or more upfront and more demanding than others. And so there's just sort of this interesting dynamic that happens that we started to speculate, well, how do these transitions actually work together? I've got an answer for that, not in this lecture, but it's one that we'll definitely look into. So here's just a question for you. Like, of these 7 transitions, which one do you see young adults working through the most in your clinical work or your ministry context? Maybe that's something for you to think about. And maybe just 2 more questions really quickly. Like, what do you find helpful about the 7 transitions framework? And then if you are one that identifies as an emerging adult, what transitions do you most resonate with? And who have you looked to for support? Perhaps these 7 transitions give new language to the experiences emerging adults have. This is what we're finding. Perhaps these 7 transitions also give a way for those who want to help emerging adults or support emerging adults know where to start or what conversations to probably begin with. And so what we are trying to do is be really articulate with this because we think it can really help people and we can actually show up where emerging adults say they need us the most. Can't wait to talk with you more about that. I'm going to be really interested in your reactions to this. Thank you for receiving our in-process work. Again, you're one of the firsts to actually hear this, and that makes me really, really happy personally, and hopefully really excited for you. Peace.